thank you to those who are online now and who are joining for this Learning Lab, the fourth iteration of the Learning Lab, which is co-hosted by the IFHP, the International Federation for Housing and Planning, and by VDM, Verein Deltametropool, or the Deltametropool Association, so that everyone knows that we are recording this session, so everyone knows. And I myself, my name is Regitze Hess, and I am the director of IFHP, the International Federation for Housing and Planning. We have Eva, who's from VDM, who's in the, and Eva and I are managing this meeting today. And we have 3 speakers today. But first, the title of this Learning Lab is Retrofitting Within City Limits. And we have 3 speakers today. We have Dennis Henraat, we have Claudio Acioly, and we have Karen Chapple. And we're going to get 3 different perspectives, presentations. Dennis, who will start, who is working with the Wooncoöperative De Bonte Hulst. So the housing cooperative in the Amsterdam. Claudio Acioly, who is has a long career and is part of IFHP's council. And Claudio Acioly, among other things, with the IHS in Rotterdam, but has other facets to his career, and which all do here. And Karen Chapple, who is from the School of Directors, the School of the City, correct? At the University of Toronto. We're going to get a municipal perspective, a housing cooperative perspective, or a perspective from the City of Amsterdam perspective. We're going to get a perspective, an international and European perspective. We're going to get a North American perspective from different facets and different sectors working on, with and on housing, and with specific theme this time, the retrofitting within city limits. So this is, I know, a little bit of a short and fast introduction. I would like to offer that each speaker offers more about themselves, and we will kick off this session of an hour and a half maximum with the 3 presentations, and then there'll be room for discussion. And we'll kick off with Dennis Henraat. Please, Dennis, the floor is yours, and I'm sure you have some slides that you wish to share with us.
Yeah. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And I'm trying to share my screen. Do you see my screen now?
We do not.
Here it says it does.
Yes, here it is.
Oh, okay, there it is. Okay. Yes. So I'm participating my name is Dennis Henraat. I'm the treasurer of a housing cooperative in Amsterdam called De Bonte Hulst. And we will develop a plot in Amsterdam North. More specifically, the Parkstraat Ham. First of all, I want to introduce the concept of a housing cooperative. I think most of you are familiar with it, but just to be sure, a brief introduction. So a housing cooperative is basically based on collective ownership. So none of the people who are now a member of this cooperative and who will live in the building in 2027 will own his or her own apartment or any part of the complex. And having said that, that means that nobody can sell his or her apartment, and therefore these rental houses will be available for also future generations. And the third main item of a cooperative, of course, is the community that we build. Now, as a cooperative, we also identified three main core values, which are sustainability, well-being, and of course the community. And sustainability is focused on not only the materials that we want to use in the building in the design of the building, but also in regenerating energy, reusing water, and sharing like washing machines, bicycles, cars, etc. And in well-being, we see both well-being for the individual and well-being for the collective. So a short history of the area, Buiksloterham in Amsterdam North. This area was drained in 1844, and as of 1900, there were mainly factories from the city center moved to this area. And not only the factories, but also housing for the people who work in the factories. And from the 19, then we have the First World War. Then housing demand increases, but from the 1920s on, it's mainly industry and like heavy industry that is settled in this area. Shipyards, the Fokker aircraft factory, power plants, waste incineration, etc. And this lasted until the 1970s, and then most industries closed, moved out, and they started to demolish the area. But unfortunately, the city hall and the local government in Amsterdam North, they could not come to any agreement on what to do with this area, how to redevelop this. So it took until 2005 to come to some kind of arrangement, some kind of high-level plans to redevelop this area. And they had identified four challenges. One is the densification of housing because of the increase of the demand of housing. They wanted to make this an example as a circular district. They also wanted to make it like a maker district, a bit in the tradition of what it used to be, but then on a smaller scale. So, yeah, we now have like people who make furniture, clothes, but also artists, painters, sculptures, etc. And they saw a very strong focus on a social cohesive area. And that's because they were concerned about the different areas coming together in this area, the Buiksloterham. And with on the one side, the city center of Amsterdam, with a lot of privileged people, but also the surrounding areas, which they call undeserved neighborhoods, where people have lower income and lower education. So when in 2022 we had the chance to tender for this plot, we took a chance and we won the plot. So what are our ideas? Apartment-wise, we can build 35 apartments on a plot of 320 square meters. So that's pretty dense. We also fully embrace the sustainability and circularity requirements from the local government. And we chose a column beam structure for the building to be flexible in the layout, also in the future. We want to retain and reuse rainwater. We want to reuse gray water. Like I said, we're going to share washing machines, bikes, tools, cars. And we are aiming for an innovative system for heating and cooling. So we can make the energy demand of the building as low as possible. And this is a kind of a hassle because the contractor and architect, well, they're not familiar with this. So, and then we don't have any makerspace, so we cannot fulfill the requirement of the local government to also create some kind of a maker industry. But what we do focus on is the social cohesive area. And that's, I think we can put a lot of value into this neighborhood because we have a communal space on the ground floor of approximately 100 square meters, which will be not only available to the residents of the Bonte Hulst, but also to people from the neighborhood or even a larger area outside of the Buiksloterham. The intention of us is to create a program of activities to bring together all people, all different kind of people from different kind of areas. And we have a design that respects neurodiversity. And this is also because the people who are in the Bonte Hulst, who founded the Bonte Hulst, they very well realize that creating a new building in an existing area has a lot of consequences for the people who already live there. And well, in this way, we want to involve all those people into our own project and give them the space and opportunity to be part of it, even though they're not living in there. Yeah, so this is basically the presentation I prepared. Maybe there are any questions.
Are there any questions from the audience? You can just unmute and place your question. I would like to place a question now, and it might come up later on. In this area of Amsterdam North, there's been a changing attention or appreciation that it exists. More and more people seem to be going to Amsterdam North. Do you find that this is also benefiting your cooperative?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't think that other people coming to the Amsterdam North is benefiting our cooperative. And what I mean by that is that we would have signed up for this tender also if there was only one plot available and nothing else would change in Amsterdam North. And that's because of the circularity and the sustainability requirements from the local government. That's what we aimed for. And what you now see in Amsterdam North is that some areas do have to comply with sustainability and circularity requirements, but some areas not. And that causes a lot of confusion and yeah, I don't think it makes the whole area Amsterdam North one as a whole.
Thank you. Another idea I'd like to put out there, but Dennis, it's not necessarily for you to answer at this point, but I'm finding in the discussions that I'm confronted with that just recently a researcher said, well, isn't retrofitting something only for an elite few and only benefiting a particular class of people? And they're seeing it as a tool for gentrification. I don't believe this myself, but it would be interesting. I just want to throw this idea out here as we go through this discussion of retrofitting and retrofitting within the city limit. Who does it benefit? And Claudio, I see your hand is up.
Are you giving me the floor?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Let me share my presentation.
Wait, Nadia is still having her hand up, so maybe first.
Okay. Nadia?
Yes.
Sorry, Claudia.
No, thank you. Can I still ask a question to
Yes.
Dennis?
Yes, please.
Dennis, I'm wondering, your project had about 35 apartments and I don't know how many others on 35 square meters, etc. How did you organize yourself with the habitants, the future habitants of De Bonte Hulst?
The future residents?
Yes.
Yes. Now we just founded in 2022 when we started this whole project. So we're not fully filled in that sense. So we don't have enough people for all 35 apartments yet. So now we're aiming for specific households that fit in the remaining apartments. And like I said, we chose the column beam structure to be flexible in the future. And then we hope to keep the apartments fit for purpose as necessary.
Okay. And how do you solve the risk with building, starting to build, if you still are looking for your residents?
Yeah, so usually this kind of projects are done in a buying structure. So then if you have like 70% of people who wants to buy apartment, then you can start. This is for rental. So we founded an association. The association will be the legal owner of the complex. And the members are now doing the development and will live there in the end. So the risk now is mainly covered by pre-financing from the local government.
Okay, thank you.
And when it doesn't succeed, then of course the risk is on us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. I can see that Tom's hand is raised. Is that correct? Yes, Tom, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Regitza. Yeah, Dennis, from me, a question or a couple of questions. Firstly, when is this going to be built? And secondly, in terms of, I guess, the general redevelopment of this area, not just your individual block, but having changed from being fairly heavy industrial use to residential use, were there issues or are there issues with contamination of the land, and how are they being addressed, and who is paying for that?
Yes, thank you for these questions. We're still in the designing phase, and the planning for building is Q2 next year to start. And about the contamination, yes, the soil is contaminated, and the local government is taking care of that, and they deliver the soil, how do you call it, bouwrijp, ready to build, and it's the soil has been cleaned up till 1 meter and 20 centimeter, and then below the 1 meter 20 centimeter until 2 meter 50 or so, it's lightly contaminated, and below that, you shouldn't go there.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can also see Urban Green Deals. Another Tom is Urban Green Deals. Please, your hand is up.
Yeah, short question, I think. Was the format of a housing cooperative a request in the municipal tender, or did you bring that in yourself as your proposal? And the second linked question is, did you pay market rates for the land?
We did not propose it. So the municipality has like a sort of action plan to promote this kind of housing. So they this plot was available only for housing cooperatives. So we did not have to compete with professional parties, professional contractors. And two, yes, we do have to pay the market price. So that's a bit odd in this equation, but we do have to pay the market. Yes.
Interesting. Okay, thanks.
Well, I would like to say thank you very much to Dennis for his presentation, and also thank you very much for an engaged audience. I would like to take the opportunity to move on to Claudio. I was a little premature before, but Claudio, the floor is yours.
Okay,
And,
thank you. Thank you.
We'll take immediate questions after Claudio's presentation. Then we'll also have hopefully time at the end for more questions across the board after Claudio and after Karen. So please, Claudio.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I was asked to address the issue of retrofitting from the perspective of the work we did in UN Habitat by the time I was head of housing and slum upgrading and head of capacity building, which is understanding the dynamics of informal settlement and slums within the issue of retrofitting. So I'm just looking at just a moment. I think, yeah. I'm just sharing a part of a presentation, so I cannot share all the presentation. So the presentation focuses on just looking at how retrofitting, renewal, regeneration, the concept is applied in a situation of developing countries where we have massive informal urbanization and large parts of cities informally developed, and the government comes with policies to retrofit the area, to improve the area, to regularize. So different approach which materializing in general the integration of these areas into the urban tissue of cities. So just looking very briefly on slum formation and informal urbanization, which is a very dominant part, a type of city growth that takes place in many parts of the world. And to start with, how do we measure informal urbanization in slums? Is it through 5 critical dimensions? So if you lack improved sanitation, improved water, security of tenure, the durabilities, which mean the building materials, they're not adequate, they're provisory, they don't give stability, and the space, so that you have a situation of overcrowding. So if you are in this situation, you are numbered in the data as a slum dweller. So just to give an idea about the scale, so these are the types of developments we see in many parts of the world. So land and very often should not be occupied, areas that are subject to flooding. In Africa, the same situation, large-scale informal urbanization. As you can see, you can hardly see the public space. So a situation that repeats with a lot of precarious infrastructure. In Asia, the same story, very densely occupied, small units, and massive occupation. And these are usually settlements that are subject to climate change. So they are in areas that whenever there is any climate-related event, which are becoming more frequent and more intense, they are the first ones to pay the bill. But we also see in Europe and United States the situation of informality gaining significant scale. And as we speak about the global housing crisis, and the way it manifests itself in different parts of the world, this is the way the housing crisis is manifested in North American cities and European cities. And today we have 1 out of 4 people living in urban areas in the world, they live in these conditions. Now, very briefly looking at the retrospective of policy response, and I will be very short on this. So we have an enormous amount of experience in 50 years of attempting to give us a sustainable response to this problem. And I can show you that there are 4 different models. So in a certain period of time, it was the dominance of slum clearance and relocation model. So people, the settlements were demolished, people were sent to social housing, public housing schemes, usually in peripheral areas where land was cheap. So it implied displacement, resettlement of residents somewhere in the city. The urban redevelopment model, which is at the moment adopted in Addis Ababa and Mumbai and other places, it's not so popular, but many governments is opting for that instead of retrofitting, is just demolishing the entire area, redevelop it on same location and give a chance for residents to return to their area. The slum upgrading restructuring model, which is very much popular at the moment in many places, which implies partial allocation of the residents, an area-based intervention where the retrofitting actually takes place and people may be relocated to a nearby area in order to make room for infrastructure and decrease density. And there is something which I call the conventional or romantic slum improvement model, which residents stay where they are, the situation stays where they are, and just some improvement here and there on infrastructure, drainage, but not really big change take place in the area. So not much of the retrofitting, but more the concept of, let's say, regeneration on site. Now, the concept comes actually from what we know from the idea of conservation, rehabilitation, and redevelopment. So we know in the history of urban renewal that there are different approaches and different concepts, but the idea of slum upgrading in the developing world actually emerged from these concepts that were applied in many European cities and North American cities. So the notion of retrofitting and urban regeneration is that it's sometimes called it urban renewal or urban renaissance and even urban redevelopment. It implies the redevelopment of formerly rundown urban areas, often in a city, through improvements to the environment, housing, and employment opportunities. Projects as investment designed to bring back underutilized assets, buildings, infrastructure, land, and redistribute opportunities, increasing urban prosperity and quality of life. Is urban regeneration as a comprehensive area-based process aimed at improving the physical, environmental, and socioeconomic conditions in an urban area. And it often involves investments, sometimes very heavy investments. I'll just briefly show you an example of that. That's intend to revitalize through economic growth, social development projects, and sustainability. And it really implies creating public space, increasing density, and working with underutilized assets. So the logic of interventions in terms of slum upgrading is that the idea that public investments in basic infrastructure via in situ slum upgrading projects will generate private investments and use of domestic savings in housing and improvement by the inhabitants, which means the government, the state providing a de facto recognition of the space, which provides people the sufficient security of tenure for them to improve their housing conditions. So in this case, the focus is really the intervention of public space, and housing improvement takes place by inhabitants. So there are variables that the residents control themselves: the construction time, the labor force, building materials, the construction process, and seed finance. We know by experience that people mobilize different forms of finance to get access to building materials, to pay for certain services and improve their housing condition. Now, there are variables that they absolutely depend on the state: infrastructure, service land, legal security of occupied land, financing and loans, planning and architecture and engineering. So that's the focus of the policy. Now, how does it look like in terms of spatial intervention? Now, it's based on two, let's say, paradigms. One is that considers the land as a collective domain, so use some tools like community land trust, and doesn't touch very much on the individual rights of families or individuals over the land, but creates a possibility for collective property where people have, just like a cooperative or a condominium, they have share of that land tract, and the government puts then a recognition in name of an association that represents the inhabitants. And the other model is that it defines the public and the private domain, open the streets for infrastructure, and actually start working incrementally to define what is public and what is private, because it is only allowed for the governments to invest in infrastructure in public land. And that's why the road systems or the street systems and the pattern of the grid is very important. So basically, it's like that. The enumeration to find out who lives there, what exists, is a first step. And the second step is really coming with the planning and introducing the street pattern. So it is basically moving from one to the other. And in that particular approach, it is acceptable. For example, the Inter-American Development Bank, when it started to finance in Rio de Janeiro the slum upgrading program, Favela Bairro, it accepted 4% of demolition, which means the settlements had to remain fairly how they were, and the demolition and relocation were only to a minimum. So otherwise it would not be considered. But as the program succeeded in really implementing to scale, they went up to 8% demolition, which means giving more space for streets to be implemented, infrastructure network to be implemented, and then creating a demolition and relocation strategy which allow the area-based plan to be developed and implemented incrementally. So you have situations like that, that it is incrementally implemented, although there is an area-based plan, a land subdivision scheme, but as you can see, quite complicated because some of these units, they are not exactly within the boundaries of the plots that the plan define. So you have situations like this in another city where it remains like that for a long time because the resources are not in place to actually relocate the buildings and the families that are situated on the lane that is supposed to be used for infrastructure and streets. So you have two systems, one on each side. One is the land occupation and the planning that goes there. So defining the private and the public domain, and then creating a regularization program, investment in infrastructure. And then you have the whole process of urbanization and regularization, which is defining the individual rights of individuals and households over that particular parcel of land where they are living. But as you can see on the right, the process is incremental of improving from a shack to a fairly built with materials that are more solid, more permanent, which means this is the biggest problems that most of these programs have. They retrofit the area, but the housing unit within the boundaries of the individual domain, it takes a long time, and you don't have the means to enforce the laws, the building laws, the planning laws. There are some limits that individuals have, but they do not respect because they need space, so they build in the way they want. So a whole set of problems after the first intervention takes place start to emerge within this area. So you could see, or you could say that you have two phases, phase one and phase two, when you speak about retrofitting into an informal settlement located in a city that could be in Latin America, Africa, or Asia. So the conventional practice that you have the urban plan and usually different projects and dealing with four major things: the street, the public space, the infrastructure networks, and all the facilities and equipments necessary. So the grid and the urban design is quite important. So the area-based plan, they have to understand that concept of dealing with an existing structure and providing the guidelines for future development and consolidation. So we have a lot of examples of that, and many of these projects, they stumble on this: land tenure, regularization, and tenure security. It takes long, it's very complicated. There is a mafia in the notarius industry, so they don't want to regularize, they don't want to make the whole history of those properties. And so many of these settlements, despite of having been implemented, improved, and even integrated into the cities, they remain fairly out of the, let's say, land registration system. So as you can see in this drawing, it quite clear define where the public intervenes. So drainage, pavement, water, electricity, and then intervene on the land tenure, so the security of tenure and regularization and documentation and registration. And this is what takes quite long, and many of these programs never realize this part. So here is just to show you some examples, and then I'll stop. This comes from the work I was leading in UN Habitat. So I was leading a trilogy, which is the guide and the concept note, which using streets as a tool for urban transformation, then a practical guide on how to design programs of that, and then another module on capacity building and training of municipal staff to do these things. So basically the approach is that you have city with several slums, and then you made a study to understand where all the main roads are located that connects that area to the city. And once you do that, you start improving with the budget you have these main roads and streets to connect these areas to the city. And as the budget allow, you start then implementing the area-based plan, and that in the future, so with the resources you have, with the means you have, you start expanding and implementing and creating a system of integration of these areas into the city. So this is what I would call, in the terminology we're using for this session, it's a city-wide retrofitting strategy of informal settlement. So basically, we have situations like that. What came first? Is it the infrastructure, or is it the building? So people get together, they participate, and then as you can see, this is a situation before, this is a situation after. When improvements come, people start improving their own, let's say, housing unit. Also business, they start improving the business, changing, and business also take off. So the whole idea of integrating these areas really transform. So places where I worked, so I mean, these are the last slides. You know, this is in Tirana. So giving you a history, once the, let's say, the communist regime fell out, there were massive invasion of, let's say, communal and public land in the periphery of Tirana. And then people start building massively and ad hoc in the same way we find in Peru or Brazil or India, in many places. So an NGO led by some of our alumni, they even got a prize for that. They set their hands on and said, okay, let's work with these people, let's organize per street, and let's make plans. And then they start organizing the population, defining the main roads and main streets with gravel. So they mobilize gravel to put, and then people were adapting and then creating communities. So people coming from different parts and working together to make these places accessible, and then getting support from the government to actually make the street system possible. And that's basically, I stop here because of the time. And what conclusions can we have? I think a major conclusion is that working in this context, very dynamic, the action of, because there was a question about that, whether do we generate value that the residents that are there will be, let's say, evicted by the market. In some places, yeah, because it relates to location, and it relates to the improvements that these actions do. So all of a sudden, you have water, electricity, accessibility, public transport, so you can reach the city, you can reach a job. So the places become very, very wanted in the market of informal settlements. So one of the things is, how far are people, let's say, relocated from market forces? So this is a big issue. And the other is the inability of government of, once the improvement takes place, the government seems to be unable to treat these areas as a normal neighborhood integrated to the city. So the whole bias, the whole, I would say even segregation towards these areas remain unresolved. They're not fully integrated into all the municipal services, and so they remain largely on the sideline. So there are many lessons to learn, and I stop here, and so that we can continue with the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudio. This was also very insightful. I would like to open the floor to any questions directly to Claudio. So if anyone who has a question, please unmute. I'm having a little trouble seeing everyone at the moment. I just need to.
It's quite a starking difference from a cooperative in Amsterdam North and the realities that I'm sharing with you. And I think that the linking part is that when you put people together, and there are several initiatives in developing countries to use the cooperative system in terms of the land. So community land trust, in order to realize the security of tenure, to actually access land and improve housing conditions. Also, the old, let's say, story of urban renewal in the Netherlands. I was very familiar with Rotterdam building for the neighborhoods and what follow up as well. The wijk aanpak and all this. It has a lot of similarity, despite the fact that development conditions and income are very different. And the more I worked in more, let's say, non-developing contexts, the more I found similarities, provided that you place the development context in front of you. But the concepts and strategies can be quite similar, surprisingly.
That's a direct question I'd like to ask, because you've given us a contextualized the retrofitting of slum conditions that we would associate with vast areas of the world. 1 in 4, as you say, people are living in these conditions, and we associated it, to use a technical term, the global south, but of course we see this other places. Do you think that this approach of the street as a tool, for example, and the progression of approaches is something that we can reverse back and use on, let's say, an old term, but the more developed world?
Look, I think that when when I was in the 80s, end of the 80s, when the building for the neighborhood in Rotterdam was coming to, let's say, final stages, which was an urban renewal, citywide urban renewal program there. I visited some of the projects, and they were basically redesigning the area, sometimes decreasing the density, creating street, but also creating public space. So in terms of the design approach, in terms of the planning approach, there were many similarities. The issue of participation was very strong. So depending on which city and which type of government you're dealing in developing countries, you will have this quite a similar approach. The difference, perhaps, with Rotterdam in those days is that the municipality actually empowered the residents to take, let's say, decisions because they had the neighborhood group that took decisions. The resident had N+1 members, so they had the majority to decide, and they had one architect hired by the municipality to work for them and defend their interests vis-a-vis the municipality. Now, in some places, we have this, like Medellin, follow a little bit like this approach on empowering, let's say, the community-based organizations to create their foundation to dialogue with the government. And we see this in some cities in India as well. So, yeah, you can make some parallels of now from the planning. It's quite difficult because when you look perhaps like when I was working in Moldova, yeah, I saw informal land development processes and which were quite similar. And I know that in Belgrade there is also an informal land development system which creates settlements like that, which is informally occupying land. But the level of, let's say, hazard or spontaneous chaotic occupation. I perhaps only in Albania I saw something very, very similar. In other places, Armenia and Bulgaria, only the Roma settlements were a bit, let's say, informally developed, but the majority of the urban fabric was quite well defined. But the point of departure are always the street. I believe that the street-led approach is quite suitable worldwide in the sense that if you go to I lived and worked in Cairo. If you go to old Cairo, for example, or medieval Cairo, Fatimid Cairo, it is the street pattern that was defined 1,000 years ago that actually is still there present. So the planning and defining the public space is foundational for future of urban areas, I think.
Thank you very much, Claudio. And I saw there are comments coming in that also contribute with examples. And I would like to thank for the comments coming in through the chat. To be mindful of time, to give sufficient time, I would like to ask Karen now to the floor is yours, and then we can hopefully have time for some discussion at the end. So Karen, the floor is yours. And I'd like to say, Claudio, you've phrased it much better than I did before, the contrast between the formal and the informal. So thank you for that. But Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me. And I've really enjoyed these very different talks that we are giving. I assume you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about ADUs, which are accessory dwelling units. So small scale or secondary units that have a kitchen and a bath, but are part of a larger dwelling, and as a way to densify single family lots primarily, but also can be used to densify other types of urban development. So this is where I started with this journey. This is me in as a professor at Berkeley. And when I built an ADU in my backyard, which I didn't have any intention of doing a year before this photo was taken, but I had a group of engineering students come to my office hours and say they wanted help figuring out how to build a net zero energy efficient cottage in somebody's backyard. And could I please advise on that? And I said, why don't you use my backyard as the prototype? And they did. They drew up plans, and then I had an architect put them into reality. But this what this demonstrated, and this actually then became kind of a revolution in ordinances in the city of Berkeley and then the state of California. But this demonstrated that you could first of all easily accommodate multiple dwelling units on a lot. And then we could use all energy efficient materials, double glazed windows, blue jeans for insulation. There, you don't see solar on the roof here because it actually doesn't fit on a unit this small. We actually had to put the solar on the main house, but it is indeed a net zero dwelling. So these types of secondary units come in many different forms. I just showed you a detached one, but we often have attached. We often have them interior or junior types of units. We have lower level or basement units. We often have above garage units, and then we often convert the garage itself. This is some examples, and these come from the Association of Retired Persons in the U.S., which has focused on this a lot in order to make possible aging in place for elderly. And I took some illustrations from them because I thought it was interesting. In Georgia, on the top left, you could see matching the architectural style of a small city. On the top right, it's from Portland. You can see where there's a very cleverly inserted new entrance next to the garage, which has been converted. The bottom left photo is above a garage, very sweet reuse of a space. And the bottom right photo is an interior space reused, reconfigured to be a separate unit within the main house. There are many barriers to doing this type of development, and that's what in both the US and Canada, a number of cities and states and provinces have been working on extensively. Barriers in terms of zoning. So most land in the United States is zoned for single family only. It's illegal to build multifamily dwellings. This is Canada. This is a map of Toronto. Everything in yellow is single family. And until recently, again, you could not put any extra units on any of this land. So 54% of the land in the city was off limits. In most of California, 95% of the land is single family. So this is a very exclusive pattern and makes it very hard to do infill development. Many cities have worked on removing these barriers. So this is from a study we did in Portland, which mapped out the production of infill accessory dwelling units over time as they enacted different reforms, gradually figuring out, learning what's going to work in that particular city. So the reforms in the 2000s were not particularly effective. When they started waiving the development fees, they started getting some take up in the 2010s. When they started allowing short-term rentals, they got more take up. And then when they finally relaxed their design, and particularly the setback standards, so that you didn't have to, place the accessory dwelling unit 5 feet or 10 feet, 3 meters off the rear lot line or the side lot line. That was really important, and they started to see the rapid growth. California has done much the same thing in a set of state legislative actions. About 100 different bills at this point have been passed in the last 10 years since I built my cottage. And now 20% of all building permits, all residential building permits in the state are for accessory dwelling units. And as you might expect, these are concentrated in the cities, particularly in the suburban cities of Southern California, like Los Angeles. It's not just California. In the US, we have some evidence, although there's not good data on this. We have a little bit of evidence just from rental listings, how many ADUs are out there, and we've just seen a tremendous growth really in the 2010s, really since the beginning of the housing affordability crisis. And this continues today now in Canada as well. So a few other challenges I want to mention before I wrap up. It's not just the zoning. When we have surveyed people about why they haven't been able to build, there's financial barriers is a huge chunk of the problem, that our lending systems are not configured right to pull out equity of your home and invest in expanding into an accessory dwelling unit. A lot of people also don't know about ADUs. They don't see them. If they live in a typical suburb, they may never have seen this. They don't understand all the functions it has and the convenience it can provide. And so we still have a far ways to go in terms of education. A lot of folks ask, are these new units for rental? And our studies have shown that absolutely they are. We're seeing about in our this study, which was across Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, we found 57% that were rentals. 39% long-term, 28% to someone in your family or a friend. And then about 11% are short-term rentals. So people usually kind of rotate between renting to a friend, renting to somebody they don't know at arm's length, or renting on Airbnb or another platform. They don't use it for just one thing. They typically rotate it through depending on what their needs are in their particular stage of life in terms of income and space. A lot of people question whether this will create too much density, and I know that's not really going to be an objection in the Netherlands, but certainly in North America, there's a lot of complaints about having too much density in the neighborhood. So for folks in Berkeley that were complaining, we did this map showing a kind of prototype of what would happen if the people that could build, because only about half of the folks actually are able to build on their particular parcel due to its physical configuration, and only about 30% of those want to build. So if everybody who could build and wanted to build did, this is what it would look like: a few more units on a block, not a huge parking or density issue as the neighbors often fear. And finally, I want to wrap up with a few examples of what's going on in Canada in terms of innovation in the missing middle, what we call the scaled up areas. So not just the suites and accessory dwelling units, but thinking about plexes, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, stacked townhouses, and so forth. And these are the types of buildings we're trying to get more of, and particularly in Canada, where we have either tall or sprawl. We tend to have very tall condominium buildings or large lot single family housing. So we're trying to build more in the triplex, fourplex area. This has proved to be really hard, despite the passage of legislation in Toronto, expanding housing options, trying to spur this market. It's been tough to do. One thing that the Canadian federal government has jumped in to help with is plans. They've created a design catalog for triplexes, for fourplexes, making it really easy. There's a package you can download with the plans, with the specifications, that then can kind of make a template. And so we see cities adopting these designs from the catalog and saying, if you're building like this, hey, you're approved. You don't have to go through any special approvals. And so this, we're hoping, will speed things up quite a bit. Another piece of the puzzle is the apartment building, and an innovation in Toronto that we're seeing, and we're seeing this actually all over Canada, is the mass timber building built modular. So we have modular factories on the outskirts of the cities. We truck in the pieces. We have mass timber, and more sustainable, particularly in a place like Canada, than the steel frame. And we're building to energy efficiency standards as well. This is a firm called Assembly in Toronto built this mixed-use building on a street in Toronto. This firm just got a huge investment by venture capital and is getting Lindblatt's from Sweden to help it build a factory at this point. So the Swedish model is very much coveted in Canada right now, given our housing crisis. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Karen. I'm going to just start with one question. And this is specific when we get into the question of what is too dense. What is the threat that people see as too dense? Too many people tapping into, let's say, infrastructure, water, and electricity. Is it a not in my backyard that one is changing the typology of buildings in the neighborhood? Do you have any elaboration on why people see too dense as a threat?
Yeah, sure. It's a very interesting question, and it's a classic question for us planners. And it's largely a not in my backyard phenomenon that I think where you hear it manifested mostly is in the issues around parking and the people's parking space and the threat of losing that parking space in front of their house, which they feel like they are entitled to. And we have given them that false sense, unfortunately, over the last 100 years. And we need to kind of take back those parking spaces for the public. So that's a big issue. And then I think there's also the fear of property values going down, which is completely unwarranted based on studies. These are gonna, if anything, add value to the neighborhood, and they certainly add value to the individual properties.
Thank you, Karen. I can see Claudio has his hand raised. Claudio, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Very nice, Karen. Thank you for your presentation. I have quite a number of questions. Is there a program to finance or public finance or private finance banks or some kind of financing scheme behind this? My question is whether this is a purely ad hoc individual per individual, or there is a policy where there is a way that I want to do that. I can go to a bank and apply for this program and this. So this is one question. And the other is you spoke the offer of rent, right? Rental units. Are we speaking about singles or couples that are renting these small units, or are they households with kids? And could you tell a little bit on the affordability side, on the demand side?
Sure. Okay. Great questions. On the finance side, yeah, this being North America and not Europe, it was really put on the individuals to finance themselves. And in our initial studies, one thing we found was that about half of the folks building in California were building out of cash or credit card. and just putting $40,000 on various credit cards to finance, or borrowing from a parent. And so a lot of it was done that way in California initially. The issue is that it's very hard, again, especially for elderly people that have not much income coming in. They're retired, so they can't show an income flow. You're not allowed, according to underwriting regulations, to count the future rent from the ADU as collateral for the loan. So that's been a big challenge that actually the federal agencies in the United States have worked to mitigate in some circumstances. They're providing guarantees so that can be that's one obstacle that they're working on getting rid of. There are, in both US and Canada, there's extensive efforts now at the federal level to do large scale financing. And I think this is the realization that maybe there was a wave of building in California, but now to make it sustainable, to grow it across the country in different types of markets that maybe aren't so hot, we need to actually have a financing program. In Canada, the Liberal government under Trudeau introduced an $80,000 loan program, which should help in that country. And California did a $40,000 US loan program, and actually gave out all of its loans within the first 2 hours of its opening it up. So there was they had 4,000 people immediately apply, and it had to close down. So clearly the demand is out there for more loan programs. Which brings us to the issue of affordability. So who lives in these? And we could see from my studies and surveys that a lot of it is friends and family. And so it's providing basically an affordable alternative for those folks, which I always say that then prevents them from going and building, occupying a low-income house and gentrifying it. So it's actually kind of an anti-gentrification strategy to provide at least some starter housing when we have so little, and we find that many people are turning to low-income neighborhoods to find housing they can afford, and then having a chain of displacement. So that it mitigates that. Now, that said, in our studies on affordability, we found that generally they are coming in at about median affordability level, and it differs region to region. But it's about at median income. It's about affordable at median income. So it's a sort of a moderate to middle income affordability type. It's not one that is providing deep affordability or even slightly deep affordability. And that's because they're building now for about $300,000 and more in some places. The land is free, so that's a benefit. But it's still more expensive than a low-income household can afford. And then who moves in tends to be, well, initially it was primarily smaller households. It was single people, it was students, and it was older people. Grandma would move in. But increasingly, California kept changing. As I mentioned, there's been about 100 of these laws passed, kept changing the maximum size. So now you can build a 1,500 square foot unit in many places. You start to be able to have 2-3 bedrooms in these. And so you're starting to see families in them as well.
Just one clarification on the connection to water, electricity, sanitation. It's all individual metered to the units that are built, or how is it solved?
Yeah, usually you are connected to the main structure, and that reduces the amount of infrastructure required, obviously, because you're just running a pipe from the main structure to your cottage or garage. That said, most are metering it separately, just because as a rental unit you want to have a separate meter often.
Okay. Thank you.
I can see a question. Tom, there's a question. Your hand is raised. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Karen. Just a quick question regarding, it was interesting you brought up at the end of your presentation those other two types of development after talking about the ADUs, and I just was wondering if you or anyone had looked at that in the Canadian or the US context in terms of the relationship between a more permissive environment for the development of auxiliary dwelling units in relation to processes of intensification of residential areas at that greater scale, so the so-called missing middle or apartment development. And I'm from Australia, and on a few occasions when different cities have introduced as of right regulation, in a planning system where it's been as of right to be able to develop a secondary dwelling on an allotment, that's often related to, I guess, a downturn in the more intensive redevelopment of sites as apartments or in that sort of medium density scale. Has that been looked at all? Where, in a sense, the easy option of doing, and often quite profitable option of doing a secondary dwelling unit actually has an unintended consequence of inhibiting more intensive types of redevelopment?
Yeah, it's an interesting question about the relationship between them. And I think, and we're just starting to understand it, because think about and this is true in Australia too, where there's been just a tremendous take up of auxiliary dwelling units in the backyard or in the garage, and in places like Sydney. So that was sort of the first wave of laws, and then it was followed by these other types of small scale or missing middle types of density. And what's interesting is that then that wave of legislation has not resulted in a wave of development in the same way. And so what is actually, I think, happening here is that you don't have the interest on the part of homeowners in building multiple units. Like, I wanted to build an ADU to put my sister in when she visited, but I didn't want to build, a fourplex to put all my cousins in as well. Right. So the motive isn't there. So very few people want to turn into small scale developers. Very few homeowners even want to do a big renovation on their home. There's a resistance to that. So it's a very small set of those people that really want to be developers. And I think this kind of assumption that, you can build a fourplex, you're going to go out and do it, is not based on reality. I guess the question then is, who are these small scale developers and how are they going to get their land? Because they ultimately we would need to acquire it from these single family home owners in order to build that missing middle. So that's kind of the puzzle, is how do you make it possible? And then once you start to open up single family neighborhoods to developers, then there's fears about financialization and how, who are they going to be, just a bunch of speculators coming in to build? And so the NIMBY is, I think, going to double down. The NIMBY movement will double down when that happens. So it's really a dilemma, I think, how to spur this missing middle. And I don't think we have actually seen it done successfully anywhere, except, of course, a few great examples.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for answering both Tom and Claudio with very good questions from both Tom and Claudio. There is still some opportunity for more questions. And at this point, I would welcome questions to both or Claudio or Dennis or Karen. The floor is open. We have some opportunities for anyone who would like to place some questions across the board. I would like to offer one comment. Looking back at IFHP is an old entity, an old association, and yes, IFHP comes out of the Garden City movement, and I'll leave it to Eva and Paul if they want to comment on VDM, but IFHP has, through its history, been looking at multiple different types of solutions in the delivery of housing and planning. And if we go back, I'm going to be a little bit historic, but 100 years ago in Vienna, IFHP was present in trying to address questions of multiple different solutions on the delivery of affordable housing. And it wasn't that IFHP came up with it, but they were just part of the conversation. And there was the multiple solutions included what's called the settlers movement now. How do people build themselves on their own, on a plot of land they don't even own? How do they build themselves a very small dwelling? We can take this parallel to the vast areas of the world where 1/4 of the world's population live now, as Claudia was presenting to us, or we can take it to the small scale ADUs that Karen was just talking to us about. We can, and I'm using Vienna specifically because they were looking at multiple models. They were looking at, they advanced what was called the super block, and not the super block as we know from Barcelona, but the super block, which the super block in Barcelona is about the street, but these large housing units, they were advancing different types of tenure. If it was rental, if it was cooperatives, if it was housing associations, they were advancing different modalities, if it was trusts. And it's not to go back to history, but it's really to emphasize the fact that we keep on needing to revisit multiple models and multiple ways of addressing what seems to be quite a vast conversation many places in the world, delivery of decent housing. And that's really the point I want to make right now. And this ties into, of course, land use. If it's the backyard, if it is the transition of an area from one use to another, let's say industrial to something new, if it's the transition of a slum area to something that is very informal, to something that gets some sort of say or some sort of recognition in terms of governance. And this is a conversation that IFHP has with VDM. Both the land use and the units and how these intermesh. You can't talk about one with the other. I would like to ask if my good partner, Paul, has any comments to this.
Well, of course, I feel, having seen these 3 presentations, that this is a topic we need to sort of go into more detail in, so we can have a discussion about each 3, and there's things missing as we've seen from the conversation. That's very, very interesting. It's a very it's a very current debate in the Netherlands, definitely around what's the position of the existing urbanized area within the debate of housing and affordable housing, particularly. And it's not a debate that has been fulfilled in a way, that there's no conclusions yet. Actually, at the moment, there's quite a big push in the Netherlands for deregulation, for making more possible. But this deregulation is much more based actually on the institutional developers doing something than on the initiatives of private owners or of collectives. So I think in that sense, it's pretty clear that this is something we have to continue to be more specific about. And I do think it's very interesting to see these differences and similarities between the different cases that we've seen today, and perhaps even we can emphasize that further. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting tour de horizon that we have had today. So not necessarily a question from me, but more like a point of, well, this is something we have to continue and develop further. Maybe one point I would like to raise, and that's in the Netherlands, we've seen the emphasis on the different municipalities actually wanting to emphasize having the investments within the existing urbanized areas instead of leaking outwards in greenfield, since they have a hard time sort of retrofitting the existing urban areas. And also they need that kind of collective action in order to create lively neighborhoods that are healthy and sustainable. So I think that's also interesting dimension which you wouldn't see before. So earlier it was much more focused on expanding the city than on redeveloping the city. So just a couple of notes from my side. I don't know if you want to react to that.
Yeah, I would actually welcome Claudio and Dennis and Karen if you have questions to each other.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the two presentations, and because Karen's is the last one, is more fresh, I would say. And you mentioned Portland, and I remember getting acquainted with the smart growth strategies of Portland, which means accepting more densification and innovating on getting more compact city model in an American context of compactness, I would say. And you show the use of backyard space or rooftops, and I'm quite, yeah. Unfortunately, it's all left to the individual, as you said, but it could be very transformative if you have a very critical analysis of the existing urban stock and the build-up stock, the available infrastructure that allows more people to be connected without any harm, and whether you have a good trade-off of, let's say, we know by now that if you have an agglomeration of people, you have a good economy. Obviously, that there is a threshold, what is more dense or less dense, but we know that the idea of revitalizing in the cities is to bring more people as well, with all kinds of residential infrastructure, like pharmacy, supermarket, bakery, and all, and then you see a small economy come up. So I was just widely thinking loud with myself on to say, okay, how much would I benefit as a city government if I put up a program and I create a private and public funding mechanism that I use my leverage to make an incentive, and could create, I have a city vision, and then I said, okay, if I do this, I can create a particular city in the future where I will have more optimal use of the infrastructure and public space and public investment. I think everybody would win.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, maybe to add to that, Claudio, since you mentioned we had this convening in Brussels 2 weeks ago, and we had a presentation from Reimer van Meeding about the post-war neighborhoods. And actually what he analyzed was that there is quite a decline in terms of amount of people living in this neighborhood. It has not changed. So it's just less people living in a dwelling. And therefore, all of these services are under pressure, actually. So actually, just in order to sustain the existing services, we would already need some sort of some form of densification.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Claudia, this is where your talk speaks to my talk and Paul's comments. So because this model in North America of the auto improvement, which is, very much like what we see in slums, and it's not going to be enough without some intervention of the state in a systematic way. And this is particularly true for affordability. And you bring up the Portland smart growth example, which was almost what we needed, right? But not so you need to concentrate growth and prevent the sprawl out into the greenfield, but then you also have to have mechanisms for affordability. And maybe some of that could come from doing good planning for infrastructure and water and so forth, so that you're not you're actually able to reduce costs for the households there by making everything accessible. And yeah, so planners, I believe are the answer, right? But we, in our state models, particularly in the kind of neoliberalized North America, are not really letting us take that view.
I'd like to just also tie in Dennis, because Dennis, your the housing cooperative that you presented to us, the site was dedicated, or the tender was asking for a housing cooperative on that site, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So
Yeah, so the
please, if
city,
you have
they want to stimulate cooperatives like us. And so they decided, I think it was in 2015, that by the end of 2040, 10% of all new developments should be cooperative.
So this is very, very important in the mix that we're talking about physical typologies, we're talking about ownership forms, we're also talking about demographics. There are multiple financing forms. So this is there are many other parameters, but we do need to remember there's a matrix that we would want to encourage.
Is it municipal policy, or is there any directive from the central government?
No, this is local, Amsterdam.
Okay. When the number of members of your cooperative, is it exactly the numbers of units that the building is producing, or how is the relationship between the building and the number of members in the cooperative?
Yeah, you need to be a member to become a resident, but we're still in the designing phase, so we're still in development, so we're not there yet. So we have like 25 members, and we have 35 apartments.
Okay, yeah. Right. Very interesting.
Yeah. People sign up, and it's a lot of work, so you have to do it all by yourself on a volunteer basis.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of time next to your study or your job or your whatever. And then people say, okay, this is too much for me, and they quit.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Uruguay and Sweden have a very strong cooperative system of housing supply, and it's quite interesting. And they have a lot of interaction between there is a federation of cooperatives in Uruguay and also in Sweden, and they do a lot of exchange. And large parts of the housing stock in Sweden is produced by cooperatives. That's why I was asking. I'm familiar with the Netherlands Housing Association, other things, but I didn't know that there was cooperatives, and something to. I think you correctly said. It requires a lot of the members. Okay, you pay less because in the end you gain on the collective, but you have to put time. Like in Uruguay, every member of the household of the cooperative member has to put 16 hours per week of work because it's a self-management and mutual aid and self-help. So they all get involved on on building, and they are even trained. So like you would be trained to not only to be the treasurer, but maybe to fix some parts of the housing, which
Well,
many members like it, because they gain a skill in the market.
with that, I'd like to be mindful of time, but this opens up for further exploration in our ongoing learning labs, because we can definitely unpack this and unfold this. What does it mean to do things collectively, which is slightly different than participatory? So what does it mean? What levels of collective action can there be from 16 hours a week or 6 hours a year in a cooperative or collective or a land trust or other kinds of community based solutions. But with this, to be mindful of time, I would very much like to thank Dennis and Claudio and Karen. I'd like to thank VDM. And this session is recorded.